On March the 28th, 364, at the request of the army, the newly proclaimed Valentinian designated his brother as co-Augustus in the east, and took the west for himself. Much less talented than his older brother, Valens was chosen above all for his loyalty. The two men went to Illyria to finalize the division of the empire, and then headed to their respective capitals. The Valentinian dynasty would soon be put to the test. Valentinian, arriving in the west, was immediately challenged by the Alemanni tribes as they started pillaging Gaul. Valens was not left out either, as he was in Cappadocia, aiming to restore Rome's influence in Armenia. Procopius usurped power in Constantinople. He was a relative of the former Emperor Julian and managed to get many supporters rapidly using this claim. Valens was initially discouraged and considered abdication, but he was eventually convinced to fight. Unfortunately, Valentinian was too busy on the Rhine to help, so the Eastern Emperor took action alone. The decisive fighting took place in Phrygia in 366. The usurper was defeated and executed. The same year, the Western army pushed back the Alemanni raid, but it was only temporary as the barbarians attacked once again the next year. At the same time, Britannia faced a massive invasion. Roman troops revolted, Picts and Scots crossed the Adrian Wall, while Franks and Saxons attacked via the eastern coast. The province effectively slipped away from imperial control as enemies from all sides pillaged it. Those heavy invasions made Valentinian officially move the western capital from Mediolanum to Trier and proclaimed his son Gratian as co-Augustus. The emperor stayed on the Rhine, and the Roman general Theodosius the Elder was assigned the task of reconquering Britannia. Valentinian launched a massive and brutal counter-offensive beyond the Rhine, winning at Solecinum, while Theodosius landed in the war-infested Britannia and managed to restore imperial control over it. As Valentinian was building new fortifications on the Rhine, the Alemanni protested and attacked a Roman fort which was being built on their side of the river. This time, Valentinian attempted to form an alliance with the Burgundians, a rival tribe of the Alemanni. This diplomatic action ended in failure, but the punitive campaign was a success. Another Franco-Saxon raid was destroyed in the English Channel in 370. This constant fighting made Valentinian choose a tolerant religious approach. He was a Nicene Christian, but did not have time to deal with those religious issues mired in warfare. Valens, for his part, was like Constantius II, an Arian emperor in the east, which actively promoted the Arian doctrine in his territory. He also led a 3-year campaign against the Goths, a people which has supported the usurper Procopius. The Romans crossed the Danube several times, but were forced to conclude the war in haste, as conflict was heating up across the Persian border. Since the defeat of Julian the Apostate in Mesopotamia, the Romans had agreed to abandon their interests in Armenia and let the Sasanians take control of the region. When the Persians began to assert their presence, some pro-Roman nobles fled the country to ask for help from the other great power. The Romans saw this as an opportunity to reaffirm their positions in Armenia, and war resumed in a limited scale. While he was in the east, Valens also had to quell Isaurian and Arab rebellions. The perpetually agitated empire faced yet another challenge as a Berber prince called Firmus led Mauritania into revolt. Theodosius the Elder was sent there. He first got rid of the local governor, who had contributed to the outbreak of the revolt with his mismanagement, then marched against Firmus. Still fighting on the Rhine, the emperor soon learned about raids launched by Quadi and Sarmatians in Pannonia. They too were upset by the policy of intensive border fortifications led by Valentinian. The latter had to leave the Rhine to take care of this problem in person. As was his habit, Valentinian crossed into enemy territory, willing to make the tribes bend to imperial authority. Later, as he was finally engaging in diplomacy and received the Quadi to make peace, the deep anger he showed against the envoys triggered a stroke with which he met his abrupt end. Such a death was unexpected indeed, but the deceased emperor had taken care of his succession. His son, Gratian, had already been co-Augustus since 367. Despite this, the army insisted to elevate Gratian's younger brother as well, the 4-year-old Valentinian II, as co-Augustus in Italy. Around the same time, the general Theodosius the Elder concluded the revolt of Firmus, but was later killed in Carthage, only some time after the death of his emperor. It was in this context that Valens learned the news from the Danubian frontiers. Pushed by a new nomadic power called the Huns, multiple tribes of Eastern Europe fled west, while the client state of the Bosphorus was erased from the map. The Goths reached the Danube River and, seeking to escape from the Huns, asked for access inside imperial borders for protection. It was a delicate choice for Valens, but if he refused, they would certainly enter Roman lands anyway, threatening the Balkan provinces, while most of the imperial forces were in the east. So, the emperor allowed the Goths to cross, on the condition that they were to be disarmed and dispersed throughout the territory with the aim of dispelling the threat they posed once inside. However, the Goths were entering in huge numbers, and the situation soon got out of hand. The local Roman authorities handled the situation very badly. The Goths, without food and mistreated, revolted and began plundering the region. Valens knew he had to intervene. Just like a few years before, when he made a hasty peace with the Goths to go to the Persian front, he rapidly negotiated a truce with the Persian and marched west to settle the Gothic crisis. When he arrived, the situation was not as volatile as it could have been. Valens could wait for reinforcements. The Western Emperor Gratian had been delayed by another Alemannic invasion, but was soon to arrive to help. Valens, however, decided that his forces were sufficient, and that waiting for his nephew was just a waste of time. He advanced with his troops north. The Romans met the Gothic army of Fritigern, which had taken a defensive position with baggage wagons. What happened next were negotiations between the two sides. Fritigern was waiting for his cavalry to arrive in secret, while Valens was, after all, probably hoping for a last-minute arrival of Gratian. It was to everyone's surprise that the fight was started by Roman troops on the left side. It was without the consent of Valens. This first action ended up draining the entire Roman flank. The emperor had already lost control over his troops. The infantry of both sides started fighting as well. Suddenly, a large contingent of Gothic and Alan cavalry entered the battlefield and struck the Roman left flank. This flank was ultimately defeated and routed, which opened the way for the Goths to attack the infantry on their direct side. A similar scenario later took place on the right flank, leaving the remaining Roman soldiers without any support. The battle turned into a bloodbath. On this day, the 9th of August 378, the Roman Emperor Valens died alongside his men. This dramatic defeat had direct consequences. The Roman military, which already struggled to fill the ranks of its armies before, found itself effectively paralyzed by such a loss. Thankfully for them, the barbarians had no siege equipment to speak of, and were unable to take any walled cities. When he arrived, Gratian found the Balkans in a deplorable state. The Eastern Emperor was dead, the Eastern army had been almost destroyed, and now the barbarians were pillaging as far as Greece. The 19-year-old emperor was effectively in charge of the entire empire, so he rapidly decided to choose a new co-emperor, Theodosius, the son of the now deceased Theodosius the Elder and a pretty successful local governor. Together, they managed to stop the Goths from entering Illyria, but pushing them out of the empire was impossible for now. Gratian returned in the west to protect his own territory. The new Eastern Emperor had to spend some time in Thessalonica to recover from a severe illness. Theodosius revealed himself a firm Nicene Christian. Not long after his appointment, he enacted the Edict of Thessalonica in accordance with Gratian and the puppet Valentinian II. Nicene Christianity was now the only legal religion for the Roman state. Consequently, it would remain as such for the rest of its existence. The next year, he convened an ecumenical council in Constantinople, the aim of which was to strengthen the Nicene doctrine. Further laws and edicts were introduced later, both to confirm the council and to restrict the rights of pagans, heretics, and apostates. The following decades would see multiple actions taken against paganism. Both Gratian and Theodosius published new laws against it, and famously, the altar of victory was removed from the Senate in Rome on the orders of Gratian. What also happened in Constantinople were the negotiations with the Goths. After some minor actions against them in the Balkans, aimed at reaching a better diplomatic position, Theodosius considered it was necessary to settle a clear solution. In the year 382, two men were buried in Constantinople, the first being Valentinian I, and the second was Athanaric, a Gothic prince. After negotiations in the capital, the Goths agreed for a peace treaty, allowing them to settle in Moesia as foederati, effectively Roman allies, though they would not be assimilated and would keep their leaders. Gratian had been a quite successful emperor so far, having appointed Theodosius in the east and winning several victories himself. But some of his actions alienated his troops. The Roman commander in Britannia, Magnus Maximus, rebelled and drained much of the Western Emperor's troops to his side. The latter was defeated in Gaul, pursued, and cut down. His younger brother, Valentinian, fled to Theodosius, who proposed to cease the hostilities in exchange for recognition of the usurper as rightful Augustus. It was during this period that Theodosius managed to conclude a clear peace with the Sasanians. Armenia was to be shared between the two powers, the western part being directly annexed by Rome. In Antioch, the local population rioted yet again. Thankfully for them, Theodosius was convinced not to retaliate too violently. Maximus, for his part, was not content for long with this status quo. He entered Italy, chasing the young Valentinian out once again. This time, Theodosius marched against his enemy, defeating and killing him. A young puppet emperor was now put under the protection of Arbogast, a Roman general of Frankish origins. In Thessalonica, frictions between the authorities and the populations developed in riots. The angry emperor ordered a massacre to restore order. This would have serious consequences for him, as the very influential bishop of Mediolanum, Ambrose, excommunicated him in response. Theodosius, the Emperor of Rome, had to ask for forgiveness. He made concessions to Ambrose, and possibly even humiliated himself in public. Theodosius returned in the east in haste to calm a Gothic rebellion. This short conflict implicated men which would eventually become central to future events: the Roman general Stilicho and the Gothic king Alaric. While Theodosius was back in the east, Valentinian II died, probably pushed to commit suicide by Arbogast. In turn, the barbarian general elevated Eugenius as Western Emperor. Civil war broke out yet again, the decisive clash of which occurred at the Frigidus River. Theodosius was accompanied by Alaric, the king of the Gothic Foederati. Years before, barbarian troops in the Roman army was indeed a norm, but things had changed, as the Goths now also fought as a distinct entity from the Romans. Being here as well was the rising star, Flavius Stilicho. The first engagements saw many Gothic warriors led by Bacchurius die in great numbers. Eventually, desertions from the opposing side and favorable winds led to victory for Theodosius. Shortly after his triumph, the emperor showed his will to firmly install his Theodosian dynasty on both Roman thrones, with his two sons, Arcadius and Honorius. Not long after, his health was crippled, and so he entrusted his right arm, Stilicho, as regent for Honorius. Theodosius died days later. Theodosius was to be the last man to control the whole empire. Despite the fact that he had somewhat solved the Gothic crisis, the consequences of the defeat of Valens at Adrianople would manifest themselves even more as the 5th century dawned. The dark age that Rome was facing had been limited by emperors such as Valentinian and Theodosius. But as we have seen, during such a period, victories were never enough, and simple mistakes could directly lead to total catastrophes.